Good afternoon. Thank you for everybody for joining us after lunch. And a quick reminder to please silence your cell phones. My name is Christopher Swope, and I'm the managing editor of Citiscope. We're an online magazine covering urban innovation in cities around the world. You can read us at citiscope.org. And the title of our session today is Cities at the Front of the Climate Change Battlefield. And it's a topic that really could not be more timely in light of last week's staggering news that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States. Among the many things that Trump has said he wants to do is to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which went into force just 4 days before his election. Now, it's not exactly clear when or how he would do that, but one thing that this does make clear is that national governments come and go. Political priorities change. Everyone today is talking about the US, but this has been true recently of Canada, Australia, and others. And indeed, however, one thing that has been remarkably consistent over at least the last 10 years is the commitment that cities and their mayors are making to doing their part on climate change. And indeed, that commitment at the local level all around the world keeps growing. Just yesterday at the climate talks going on this week in Marrakesh, local and regional leaders met to reconfirm their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So local action, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Climate solutions that cities are implementing themselves and often with the help of industry partners. And we've got a great panel to help us walk through that material. First, we have Cristina Miclea. She's with the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which is a network of more than 80 of the world's largest cities. Cristina is a project manager supporting the group's work on energy and buildings. Next, we have Klaus Heidinger. He's with Siemens, where he's the head of city IT applications within the Global Center of Competence for Cities in London. Next, we have Ellen Fang Liang. She's with a Chinese national think tank called the China City Development Academy. She's been working on some of the eco-cities projects in China and will share some innovations from there. And finally, we have Barbara Kreissler. She's with Philips Lighting and is responsible for public-private partnerships to facilitate the transition of municipalities to energy-efficient LEDs. At the end of each speaker is going to have 8 minutes to present, and afterwards we'll have time for questions. I need to remind you that we have in the Smart City Expo app a feature called Ask and Vote. You can vote. You can type in a question and then vote on other questions. That way it'll surface the questions that are most on the minds of the audience. I think we also can take questions by the microphone up here, and I have a few questions as well. So please do ask some questions. And with that, we're going to get started with Cristina Miclea from C40.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's really great to be here. So my name is Cristina, and I work as a project manager at C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. And for those who don't know much about C40, we are 86 of the world's largest cities. And that's quite important because these 86 cities are committed to addressing climate change, and they represent more than 650 million people, generating more than a quarter of the world's global GDP. Most of our cities are large cities with a population of over 3 million people. However, we also have some smaller cities, what we call innovator cities. And Barcelona or Copenhagen are good examples of that. So the operating principle behind C40 is the idea that the best source of information or advice for a policymaker is another policymaker that has already solved those key challenges. So to facilitate dialogue and the exchange of best practices across policymakers, C40 operates a network model. We have 17 networks that operate across all the key topics that need addressing to solve climate change. So we have buildings networks, transportation, urban planning and development, finance and waste, and we also have some adaptation networks as well. So after years of failed negotiations, Nation-states have finally agreed to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And just last week, or over a week ago, the Paris Agreement came into force. And this is a really great step in the right direction, but we know that it will not deliver what we need for a 1.5 degree or a 2 degree world. In fact, recent evidence suggests that we're on track for a 3 degree world, and that much, much more needs to be done in the next 3 years to bridge the emissions gap. And the good news is that cities can help bridge that emissions gap. If you think of the next decisions that mayors will be making in the next couple of years up to 2020, those decisions can influence 1/3 of the world's global carbon budget. And that's the carbon that we can safely put into the atmosphere without causing catastrophic consequences, and which hasn't already been locked in by past decisions regarding fossil fuel power plants, investments in highways, and energy-intensive buildings. And collectively, our research suggests that cities can save up to 45 gigatons of CO2 by 2030. So that's about 8 times of the current carbon footprint of the United States. That's quite impressive. So cities are up to the challenge. They already have a model of global collaboration that works. And since 2009, C40 cities have cumulatively delivered 10,000 climate actions, with 1/3 of these having been delivered through collaboration, and many of them enabled through our networks. What's great about it is that we don't just see an increase in the number of actions that cities are taking, but also an increase in the scale of action, with half of all the actions reported in 2015 being implemented at the citywide scale. So what do smart cities do, or leading cities do? Well, first of all, they make a long-term commitment, and one of the most common platforms for doing that is the Compact of Mayors, where C40 cities and other cities from around the world can publicly report their greenhouse gas emissions inventories, their targets, and their action plans. And in fact, 70% of all the commitments made through the Compact of Mayors come from C40 cities. We're also seeing increased leadership from cities in China, where many of them have recently committed to peaking their emissions well before the target set by the national government. So that's 2020 for Beijing and Guangzhou, and 2022 for Shenzhen. In the US, cities are also leading the way. So we have cities like Seattle, New York, LA, San Francisco, who are setting carbon neutrality or 80 by 50 goals. As important as commitments are, we know that those commitments need to be turned into action. And globally, the greatest opportunities for action for mayors is in the building sector. So buildings represent about 50% on average of C40 cities' total emissions, with this percentage going up to 75% or even 80% in cities like New York and London. And when it comes to smart action on data, on buildings, data is a really key part of that. Like a friend of mine used to say, data is like sunshine for growing energy performance. And that has been exactly the case in New York, where the city's data sets that have been gathered through their benchmarking, audits, and retrocommissioning laws have been essential in informing which buildings should get the most technical assistance and financial advice. And the same data has been essential for informing the city's Retrofit Accelerator program, which has prioritized 1,000 projects that, if implemented, will save 1 million tons of CO2 by 2025. The same data has been used to track progress over time, and as you can see, New York is already seeing an 8% reduction in their commercial buildings, which is impressive given the large share of emissions coming from buildings in New York. Similarly, data has been key in Tokyo's case. It has really, the data that the city has been collecting since 2002 has really informed a successful cap and trade program, which has been able to deliver 25% greenhouse gas emissions in their commercial buildings just over 5 years. So we know that C40 cities are making the most ambitious commitments. They have really big goals and aims, but they need to know what policies works and what policies work and what additional tools they can use to get to their stated climate goals. And cities are also quite competitive. They want to know who's making the greatest progress and why, so that they can beat that. So driven by these questions, we're using our network model, especially in the private buildings network, to pull together benchmarking data sets from 7 cities to understand who's making the greatest progress and what local cities can learn from this global analysis to inform their local strategies and become more ambitious. And similarly, in our Green Growth Network, we have 7 cities that have jointly procured a service provider to help them measure and compare the size of their green economies. These are truly collaborative efforts that would not have been able without the network model, and which will generate new insights into what we need to do to solve climate change. So now more than ever, we need cities to lead, and we need everyone to stand up for climate change. And actually, the talk is we're running out of time because 70% of our cities are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. While we've seen some progress at the national level, as Christopher said, the progress is very fragile. So we really need to take action now. And if you're not yet convinced of the need to take action now, I would encourage you to watch Leonardo DiCaprio's film Before the Flood, as that might help. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. We're going to next hear from Klaus Heidinger.
Yeah. Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Klaus. I'm representing Siemens. And you know, Siemens is a company which produces what is today called urban infrastructure. Also, my grandmother still believes I'm selling washing machines. I work in Siemens for a special group which is called the Center of Competent Cities, based in London and Washington and Shanghai. And we work with about more than 100 cities all over the world, helping them to improve their performance in using infrastructure. And basically, when we work with cities, those are the things we are faced with. So cities today, and I would say 80% of the world's cities are growing. There are also some cities shrinking, but the majority is growing. In Europe, it's 0.5% population growth every year. In Asia and other places, it's more. So that means if a city is growing, you have to provide more energy. If a city is growing, you have to provide more buildings. But 70% of the greenhouse gases we are producing is coming from the energy generation and the way we store energy in buildings. So how can I grow in energy demand and buildings, and at the same time, I have to reduce my greenhouse gas emissions? Or if I have more people in my city, I will get more cars, I will get more motor vehicles, and at the same time, I'm committed to reduce my air pollution. So, and those are, let's say, targets you will find in every modern city in the world. Reducing, as Cristina mentioned, strong commitments to greenhouse gases, but also, especially when you go to Asia, where air quality becomes really a problem in terms of life expectancy and quality of life, they have to bring down the air pollution as well. So, what we do in Siemens is we help them finding a way how they can use infrastructure to improve their environmental impact. On the one hand side, we have cities, for instance, like London, they give us their transportation plan, so they have a quite comprehensive transportation plan, and we tell them what would be the implication if they're going to implement this technology in London. Or there are other cities like Buenos Aires, who do have a very good roadmap already, what they want to achieve, but the question is how quick and fast do we have to implement certain technologies. So what we basically did over the last 2 years in Siemens And again, we are not a consulting company. We are really infrastructure company, and we have a deep understanding of vertical technologies. So that's why we know exactly how a building technology works, because we install it 100,000 times every year. Or we know exactly how transportation systems work, because we implemented it in cities. So what we find out, there are 70 technologies. About 80% are related to Siemens, 20% are technology like wall insulation, which we even don't have, but which are key for a city. And we, in 2 years' time, we made a model how these technology would impact the environment. So for instance, what would be if a city changed the bus fleet to e-bus, 70%. So there are always a technology, a certain implementation rate, and we can measure the impact on CO2. For each of this technology, we can measure the impact on air pollution, particulate matters, mainly nitrogen oxide, but also the other air quality KPIs where the European Union is looking at. And as you probably know, a European Union city has to pay penalty when they overexceed some of these KPIs. And we can also prove what would be the impact on local jobs. If a city implements a certain technology, how many jobs will be created? So in order to make sure that this is not just, let's say, a pure technical approach from an infrastructure provider, we also worked with academics, such as the MIT and the London School of Economics for the way we calculate the impact on the environment, and with the Global City Institute, University of Toronto, and the Technical University of Berlin in how we calculate job impact and CapEx, OpEx figures. So those are the cities we're working with. So the entire city performance tool was developed with a few pilot cities like Nanjing in China, Riverside, New Bedford, Vienna, Munich, London. So that means we scale from New Bedford, 100,000 population, up to Nanjing, 10 million people. We have developed this tool, and since 2 years we are in the rollout. You see here, those are the cities we're working with. And for every single city, we come up with a roadmap on technology based on their individual data, because for the city it's very hard. They always see there's a ranking, this is the most livable city and this is the most efficient city, but every city is different. Every city has different infrastructure in place, has different behavior pattern, so you cannot, there is no best practice. So you always have to look what is your specific situation, and this one we do for each single city, and I will get almost every month a new city on that list we work with. So those are the recent studies we did, and I just brought 2 examples. Copenhagen, as you know, Copenhagen is one of the most ambitious cities in Europe to be carbon-free by 2025. But when Copenhagen did a review of the current plan, they figured out that they have a gap of about 20% to reach their targets. That's how they came to Siemens, whether we can help them with the city performance tool to bridge the gap. And what we basically figured out, so we got a lot of data from Copenhagen. We collected about 4 to 5 months their energy transport and billing data. And what we actually figured out is, it's called more or less the big incentive. If Copenhagen incentivize the building owner of the commercial buildings, so there are a few owners who runs a lot of commercial buildings in Copenhagen. If Copenhagen incentivize this owner to invest in 6 technologies for the building automation with an investment of 5 million euro every year for each owner, they could reach their target by finding another 10% of greenhouse gas reductions. In Vienna, for instance, Vienna already has a couple of technology in implementation. This is what we call Vienna First. And there's a bundle of technology where Vienna thinks they would fit very nicely to our overall city strategy, which is called Vienna Accelerated. And then there are technologies such as, for instance, e-cars, e-bus, Vienna was even not considering yet to get in their roadmap. And what we did is we modeled the impact of each of these three scenarios. And what you can see is that, and this is a graph show if I put €1 investment in a technology, which technology brings me the best impact on X CO2 and on Y on air pollution. And you probably heard that Vienna is one of the most livable cities in the world, and the reason is because they are already on the top with all the technology they have selected so far to being implemented. So they have the most cost-efficient technologies in place already, and all the others are being, of course, bringing additional savings, but not so as the other ones. And what we did for Vienna, you know, as a typical European modern city, they have a climate action plan, how to reduce greenhouse gases. You see on the black line, they reduced from 1990 about 14% already on greenhouse gas savings. And the plan is to have 35% greenhouse gas emission savings in the year 2030, which they will not achieve. They will run with their model 3 years late, so they have a delay. And even if a political situation changed, they have the risk to have another delay. But what we could prove is if Vienna would invest 8 billion euros over the next 10 years, they can reach their environmental targets already 5 years earlier by 2025. So this is how we work with cities. I hope it gives you a quick glance on Siemens and city performance tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus. And actually, I should say, if you go to Siemens' headquarters in London, you actually have gamified all of this in a way. I went there a year ago, and there's like a video game almost that you can play and be the mayor and choose all of these things. And it's a very stressful game. I played it, and it was like, oh my God. And you've got the economic output is declining because you're doing certain choices, and it's a very interesting way to kind of put all this together. And I saw school kids playing it, and it was just really, really cool.
We also had.
Can we get the microphone to work?
Yeah, actually, this game was developed in our previous center based in Singapore. And we had many, many mayors all over the world who played this game, like Porsche Onsen. And they liked it a lot because you can manage a city in 20 minutes, so to say, and see what's going on. You know, that's the point.
This is very cool. So if you're in London, check it out, definitely. Next, we're going to hear from Ellen.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Fang and I'm from China, China City Development Academy. In the past 3 years, I took part in some very important research and study of China's national eco master planning. And some cities, you know that China, we have the next 5 years plan, the eco plan, eco activity plan. During these works, I found that just like any other countries in the world, that China has also experienced a variety of disasters caused by global climate change. Rainstorms, floods, droughts, and hurricanes, and etc. And the conditions actually is turning to worse. In order to actively tackle the climate change, Chinese government has introduced various of national plans and policies and white papers and some just actions. And they focused on eco-civilization. It's a new word. It just means that eco and civilization together. And smart city, and also the sponge city construction. At the front line of climate change battlefield, there are many new innovations in China, just like to advocate public participation and eco-civilization for everyone, which is also the topic of this event, that the city is not only built for the citizens, but also wisdom. And I'm an urban planner for more than 20 years, and my friends, my colleagues, and also architects, engineers, we all realized this, that we cannot just do something we want and ask you to just enjoy it, just like that. And build nationally ecological data network platform, and to protect the freshwater resources and regulate black-water rivers, implement a real-time monitoring and early warning system of water levels on the ground, underground, and also in the pipe, and etc. Today, I want to introduce some of them. Okay. Currently in China, we all realize that it's a new era now. It's a everyone equal era. We need to generate, consolidate, and integrate all the experts, scientists, social, and private resources to build together. Just like the man here, that he's from a very famous company of China, Zhongxin Tech. And also that a lot of very large companies, they never touched the eco field before, and they built up their own eco research center now and want to make step in this field because it's a future, means a future in China. And also, they also actively to take part in some PPP, this kind of projects with the government. And you can see that these ecological APPs and the public activities are also flourishing now in China, which were, actually it's very rare to see even several years before. These all build the very good foundations of China. Chinese government decided to build a national eco-data network platform, and they announced this the last year at July the 25th. And one of the important research is in Huangshan National Park. It's a first step, and the team is led by Fuling Tech. The team is all the young, very young scientists of Fudan and other universities. They worked more than 5 years on the projects. The platform have 5 stations in Huangshan Park and collect data every 5 seconds on more than 40 eco-factors, including vapor, soil, water, and plants. After running smoothly for more than 1 year, they collected massive variable eco-data, and it was confirmed to be very useful. And this research achievement has already generated a variety of products, just like here's a very small one. We call it a small mushroom. And we have the mini one, small one, and standard one, and super stations. And this series of products can cover all kinds of granary areas, and the data will be collected and treated in a national center. Shanghai government has announced that 427 black-water rivers will be treated before the end of 2017. Scientists use the iWater technology to meet the target. Compared with the traditional ones, they used the on-time monitoring of a resource, monitoring of the pollution resource, and especially the countryside, industry areas and farm areas, and tracking the pollution flow and the generation area. And then they can manage and control economically and effectively. This summer, heavy rainstorms in some of the cities of China were led to very huge loss. Compared to other cities, Beijing was helped by its new all-time monitoring system. The Hangzhou Tech, which was a military enterprise before, was one of the suppliers and offers its latest product to monitor the water levels on the ground, underground, and as well as in the pipe, which significantly helped the management. There's a lot of new innovations, and And I bring some of the materials of them and also some details. And if you have interest, that we can contact after the meeting. And also that if you have new tags, I want to introduce to the China too, to use it because it's very useful there and they need it. At last, Chinese ancient philosophy told us that we should learn from the nature and harmony with the nature. And also that everything is connected to everything else together. We are on one entity to tackle the climate change. So let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And last we'll hear from Barbara Kreissler from Philips.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be back in Barcelona. Barcelona is one of the smart cities of the world, and I represent Philips, the largest lighting technology company in the world, and it's a pleasure to share some of my thoughts with you this afternoon. Before I zoom into what lighting can do to smart cities, I just want to give a bit of a framework of what we are actually looking at and what all cities in the world, no matter whether they're big or small, are going to be facing in the next years and decades to come. And this is what we call the global megatrends of the world. One of them is urbanization. As probably a lot of you know, we will add another 2 billion people to this planet by 2050. The second one, that's demographics. The second one is urbanization, where we will have 2/3 of us living in cities by 2050. That is nearly doubling the current size of city population. It will be the first time in human history that more people will live in cities than outside of cities on the countryside. And the third one is the rise of the middle class. We will see another 3 billion people, mostly from the south, that will join the middle class, which by itself is a good thing. But all these trends together mean that we will add additional constraints to our planet in terms of additional food, water, energy supply, and that, of course, creates pollution and waste, and ultimately will have negative effects on climate change. Cities, by no doubt, will have a major role to play in answering some of these key challenges that we are facing. Cities hold 3% of the land surface, but they are actually responsible for 75% of carbon emissions. So the decisions that city planners are taking today in terms of infrastructure, in terms of roads, in terms of food systems, energy supply, water resources, all of these decisions that they are making today will have major consequences in the decades to come. And they will be hard to unravel. So it's very important that these decisions that are taken today are informed and smart decisions. Cities, however, also are the hubs for innovation and for diversity. We see an unprecedented level of connectivity and data that citizens have access to and how they are using information. 97% of urban dwellers have a mobile phone. 47% are connected to the internet. And that also changes how citizens are interacting with their governments. They don't only want to consume information, but they want this to be a two-way street. They want to be asked about how they feel, and they want to engage with their municipal representatives. So we will require innovative ways in order to engage with citizens and at the same time respond to some of these key challenges that I was just talking about. The good news is, ladies and gentlemen, that some of these technologies are already here. They don't need to be invented. Look at lighting, for example. With the invention of LED, you could see, or you can see, an unprecedented potential in energy savings. Just by switching your lighting system, you can actually save 50% or more of your energy. You can cut your energy consumption by half. And if you connect these lights to the internet, if you make them smart, you can actually achieve energy savings that go up to 80%. So you have city controllers that at the tip of their finger, they can dim light when nobody is around. They can use these smart cities networks to monitor cities in a much more effective and efficient manner. And that has additional benefits also to the citizens, because citizens feel safer, citizens feel their cities are more attractive, and applied in offices, these systems can actually make people more productive. And when you look at the math that cities and municipalities are spending at least 50% of their budgets of their energy budget on lighting, 50%. Imagine how much money can be freed up that can be used for other infrastructure, for hospitals, for schools. So there's a lot that cities can gain by looking into smart LED connected lighting systems. And cities can, when they free up this money, they can also look into how they build their smart city infrastructure. And smart city has really become a buzzword these days. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. But the matter of the fact is, it is already happening. As I mentioned before, Barcelona is one of the cities that has implemented already a number of these applications, and we heard from Klaus before the many other cities that are actually already doing a lot of these smart city applications. And these digital technologies are evolving rapidly. Lighting plays a huge part in the rollout of a smart city. Why? First of all, because lighting takes a lot of energy consumption, as I just mentioned, and the lighting infrastructure is already out there. It exists. We don't have to build new infrastructure and networks. The light poles are there, and they can be used for additional things. In addition to providing light, you can put sensors up there. You can measure noise. You can measure air pollution. You can add a lot of additional applications to that lighting infrastructure. And there are about 300 million street lights in the world. 10% have LEDs right now, and only 2% are connected, 2% only. In the year 2025, this number will, however, go up to 35%. The important thing is to make a city smart is that these vertical applications are not standalone applications, but they actually start talking to each other. That's when a city becomes smart, and that's when citizens and city workers will actually make the most out of it. The important thing is that cities do not lock themselves into specialized infrastructure, but they operate on open interfaces, so that already now they can get ready for some of these applications that will still evolve in the years and decades to come. We have many proof points around the world. I was asked to provide one, and I actually chose Buenos Aires. And I think I would just like to show you a short movie. We have retrofitted 91,000 LED streetlights there, and the city has saved 50% in energy and has done some dramatic also improvements in terms of lowering their maintenance cost and being more responsive in case there are some failures.
Ya que la iluminación de Buenos Aires tenía unos 20 años de antigüedad y con lo cual íbamos a algo mucho más moderno.
Nuestras principales ventajas fueron ofrecer un sistema muy sólido en el cual todo el conjunto, ya sea la luminaria, la placa de LED, el driver y el sistema de control, conformaron un sistema muy confiable, muy resistente. Los principales desafíos fueron que, debido al tamaño del proyecto, tuvimos que diseñar todo un sistema de implementación en conjunto con el gobierno de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, de manera de poder llevar a cabo el startup del proyecto.
Planeamos cambiar 91.000 luminarias que corresponden al 70% de la totalidad del parque de la ciudad.
Otra ventaja de estos sistemas es que embellece la ciudad porque permite ver los colores verdes más verdes, los colores de los edificios de un tono más natural.
A ver, nosotros hoy estamos midiendo más o menos entre un 50 y 55% de ahorro de energía, o sea, en la factura que nos llega todos los meses.
Eso significa 70 gigawatts hora año, lo cual podríamos iluminar la totalidad de las escuelas y los hospitales de Buenos Aires con ese ahorro de energía que produce el proyecto.
Hemos tenido muchas anécdotas acerca de los cambios en los hábitos de las personas, pero fundamentalmente las personas disfrutan mucho más los parques y las plazas en la ciudad, salen, por ejemplo, a correr en horarios nocturnos. La gente puede disfrutar más la ciudad debido a que se sienten más seguros y a que también la ciudad está más hermosa, con lo cual también es más lindo transitar por la ciudad.
Bueno, para nosotros es muy importante porque realmente como líderes en iluminación, poder haber hecho la ciudad de Buenos Aires es un ejemplo y un flagship que podemos replicar en el resto de Argentina y en el resto de Latinoamérica.
Okay, very briefly, I would also like to touch upon two other important themes that cities need to look into. One is the technologies, what I just mentioned. The other one, we need to have adequate policy frameworks in order to scale and move faster on some of the applications that are already out there. The building sector, which has been mentioned before, is very important in that regard because buildings consume 1/3 of global energy. So buildings have the biggest greenhouse gas emission saving potentials. And governments need to become stricter in terms of the building codes that they implement, in terms of the renovation targets. We need to achieve renovation targets of 3% annually if we want to even get close to the Paris Climate Agreement targets that have been ratified. And public authorities should also lead by example by promoting performance-based procurement in their own government settings so that you don't look at the lowest initial costs, but the total life cycle cost when purchasing products. And then last but not least, we need to look into innovative finance mechanisms. When we talk to cities, we hear a lot, we have a lot of projects, but we don't have money. And then we talk to banks, and banks say, well, we have money, but we have no projects. So we think that there is really a mismatch in terms of not that there is not sufficient finance out there, but it is how to deliver innovative financing mechanisms that respond to some of the challenges that cities are facing. And cities all over the place do look into challenges of upfront capital investments. A lot of them struggle all over the world, but there are financing mechanisms out there where cities do not have to come up with these upfront capital investments. And I'm happy to go more into this perhaps when we are in the question and answer session. What I would like to say last but not least is to leave you with 3 takeaways that I think important. First of all, the connected LED systems are ready and to be scaled. The technology has been tested, it is proven, there's no time to wait. There are many examples all over the world, large cities, small cities, cities in the west, cities in the south, they all report fantastic energy savings. So let's get the ball moving there. Secondly, LEDs can create triple benefits for cities. They can reduce carbon emissions, they can provide energy savings up to 80%, and they provide impressive social and image benefits to cities. And then last but not least, it is important for cities to look into these infrastructure investments now. You don't have to wait. You can actually already take advantage now of infrastructure that is open and out there and readily available while the vertical applications are evolving. So the right time to invest into smart lighting infrastructure is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Again, we'll have a few minutes here for questions, and if you'd like to ask a question, I believe we have a microphone up front, and we'll see if we've got anything coming in through the app. I'm going to start actually with a question that picks up more or less where you left off about financing, because I think at the city level, that's a huge obstacle. And in fact, I think in Marrakesh this week, the climate talks there, financing is a big theme. There was when mayors and local leaders met yesterday, that was the central theme, is how do we pay for these solutions that we know are there to be done? So could all of our panelists talk about an example of how to crack the finance barrier? Is there an example that you can point to and kind of lessons that other cities can learn from it?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I wanted to get more into this because that is obviously a huge challenge. And at Philips, we have developed innovative financing models that we have now been testing in a number of cases. So we have for instance, a model that we call pay as you save, which means that cities can actually pay for the infrastructure that we are putting in place through the energy savings that are being created. So there are no upfront capex expenditures, which means that cities can benefit from this infrastructure from day one. And they can actually benefit from the savings, and eventually through the savings pay off for the infrastructure that we put in place. We work in this with Philips Capital and also third parties with some financial institutions to tailor make these solutions for each and every city. Another very interesting example for a financing model is what we call lighting as a service, where you don't actually, Philips remains the owner of the infrastructure, and the client is actually leasing the infrastructure, which means, again, no capital expenditures. We take care of the maintenance and the upgrade, and there's a hassle-free solution that, for instance, at Schiphol Airport, which is the airport in Amsterdam, that is already very successfully being implemented there. And at the end of the contract, we can either take the infrastructure installations back and put this into a responsible end-of-life solution, or we upgrade it so that it can actually stay there for much longer. So I think we need to look into how cities can work with off-balance financing much more, because this is really, I think, a very important way to overcome some of these initial investment hurdles.
Thank you. Ellen, how about in China? How does the finance problem get met there?
It's very interesting, and it's a very good lecture. That in China, sometimes that I know that some city they just purchase this kind of investment, and so I think that they pay by the monthly the electronic fee or what by the per person, just like that. And today that I met with some mayors of China, small city mayors, they come here for this conference. And I will ask them if they will have interesting with, because that about 2 months before that, I talked with the head of the Philips in China about this small city. They have this kind of pole, this kind of the light pole, this plan, smart pole plan for all the things I want. Just like the air pollution, this kind of monitoring, and also sometimes even the vaporing. Yeah, so it's very interesting. They said that one pole can solve the eco things by only one pole. That's interesting. I think that some of the city, they will buy it or what. But financing, I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with that part. Thank you.
Okay. Well, interesting. I think lighting might be one of the really low-hanging fruits, right? So it's so there's so much savings to be had. Klaus, what about when you're talking about kind of big infrastructure investments? A tram doesn't pay for itself, does it? Or other solutions that you work with cities on?
Well, Barbara has mentioned the models PPO, and I'm actually a fan of energy saving, so financing through energy saving, because this is exactly what we need for our CO2 targets. Because energy is the 70% responsible for greenhouse gases, energy in buildings. So if you invest other infrastructures like public transport coming from energy savings and others, that's probably a win-win situation. It's not just about financing. I guess, if you look to big cities, they have this number of problems and this budget, and the budget is getting more and more restricted. So the question is, what do I put my money in? And if I put $1 in a certain technology, what would be the most cost-efficient one? So I guess that's more a question than financing it. Yeah.
Cristina, how about from within the C40 network? Are there any good examples that you've come across that of cities cracking the financing barrier?
Yeah, sure. So just to go back to lighting, we have a couple of cities that have achieved massive savings from implementing lighting retrofits through energy performance contracting, including Quezon City and Melbourne and other cities. And the same energy performance contracting can be used for buildings. So you have an energy service companies that will do all the works for a city, and then the city is able to repay that investment through the savings that have been achieved. And in fact, the city of Paris has been very successful in completing 2 EPC contracts already, and they're aiming to retrofit 300 schools by 2020, which will involve 4 EPC, like really big EPC contracts. And in fact, a couple of the European cities are meeting in 2 days in Paris to learn from what the city of Paris has learned from going through that whole process. I think it's also important to mention that we also need to build capacity in cities. So like we were saying, how do cities work with these financial projects? Because they have so many priorities and finance is not necessarily their area of expertise. So in that sense, in London, you have the REFIT scheme, which is aimed at improving public sector building performance. But then you also have a program delivery unit, which works with local institutions to make sure that they streamline the procurement process, that all the contracts are compliant with the EU laws. And in that way, you can save a lot of time on the ESCO side and on the city side as well, which can be much better used. And I guess just another innovative example coming from Johannesburg. So in 2014, they were the first city to issue a municipal green bond. And green bonds are just like other municipal bonds. It's just that you use the proceeds to fund green infrastructure or green projects. And I think a lesson from that is that you have to be very transparent about how you're going to use the money that you've raised. And actually, there's lots of support available to cities to make sure that they are indeed transparent about how all the money is raised and what the results are. So we've been working with the Climate Bonds Initiative on developing a guidebook for cities who are looking at launching green bonds. And also the Climate Bonds Initiative have a standard for green bonds that cities can use.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go next to a question that's actually was actually on my list, but I'm glad to see that someone in the audience has asked it. The question is, who are the leaders in the solution part of the climate change topic? Where does leadership come from in the examples that you've talked about? Is it from a mayor? Is it from the private sector? Is it from civil society? Is it from the citizens themselves sometimes? I mean, where does leadership come from in the most innovative projects that you're working in? Anybody want to? Okay, Cristina wants to grab that first.
Yeah, I'll just, well, I obviously think the first step is having an engaged mayor who's very committed to solving climate change, and that's why we work a lot with mayors to make sure that we raise ambition in cities. But in addition to that, you can't just have one mayor. You have to have collaboration with different sectors, especially the private sector. And sometimes when mayors don't have the necessary powers to implement different climate actions or to roll out specific initiatives, they can achieve a lot just by working with the private sector. And the really good example of that is in Sydney, where we have a very committed mayor, and then we have a very successful private sector partnership. It's called the Better Buildings Partnership. And they've achieved really big savings in their buildings, like 30 to 50%. They're very committed, and now they're looking at how they can tackle another issue that's very specific to buildings, where you have to get greater collaboration between building owners and tenants. Most of the times owners will be responsible for complying with all the rules and regulations, but then they need tenants to be on their side. So then now the Sydney Better Buildings Partnership has launched this green lease standard where they're very clear about what owners and tenants should do and what their roles and responsibilities are at each stage. And I think none of that would have been achieved without the very close collaboration between the mayor and the private sector.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, there are so many smart cities, and in many cases smart cities is a big bubble, but they are really smart cities. And smart cities means there are leaders and decision makers who start thinking, how can I get more attractive for investors? How can I get more attractive for talents to come to my city and also for my citizen? And as soon as you start thinking of this, you have to come up with a climate program. And that's, I guess this is where the initiatives are coming from.
Yeah, just like that, I take part in a lot of big projects, just like the eco-civilization and the smart city and also sponge city of China. I can see that actually that it's not only to who's the leader, perhaps sometimes it's a mayor or the head of a town or what. But for the two samples I told you before that in this report, that they all contact with China's National Environment Protection Department. Yeah, actually that it's their decision to have this kind of program. Thank you.
So more national leadership.
Yeah, nationally.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps just to echo what my colleagues here on the panel have already said. I mean, there's obviously not one single entity that can do this all together. We need to work in partnerships. Yes, of course, there needs to be the leadership from the top. But as I mentioned before, I also very much believe in this bottom-up approach. I very much think that through the technologies and the data and the information and the connectivity that is out there, that we need to have these engaged citizens. And we recently did a study with the Economist Intelligence Unit where we interviewed in 12 cities around the world, 2,000 citizens and 600 businesses. And one of the things that came out that 51% of citizens want to engage more on platforms with their city representatives. And so I do think this two-way communication in terms of moving towards a smart city and the city responding to what the citizens actually want and need, and not just this top-down approach, I think that will be absolutely crucial for successfully moving forward.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are at time, so thank you very much for a great conversation. Just to kind of recap a few of the highlights, we're running out of time. That's loud and clear, and maybe we lost a few ticks last Tuesday with the election results in the United States. And in fact, disasters are already happening, as Ellen said. This is real, and it's happening now. And decisions that we make today have major consequences for tomorrow. And cities are both in some ways the problem, but also very much the solution when it comes to climate change. And those solutions, we heard again and again, may look different in one city than another. Buildings, energy, transport, lighting, these are all options, but I think the solutions end up being kind of very contextualized to each city. So well, our panelists can stay here for a few minutes if anybody did want to come up and ask one last question. Sorry we didn't have time for more, but thank you very much for a great conversation.